In a flash, life may change drastically. You're 32 years old, contentedly married, and making plans for the future one minute. And then you're a widow deciding whether to have your spouse cremated because his corpse was too damaged for an open coffin. I experienced it 6 months ago, Karen. After my husband, James, passed away in a vehicle accident, I was left reeling from the loss and finding it difficult to adjust to this new reality. Funeral preparations, incessant phone calls, and restless nights filled the first several weeks. I don't know how I would have handled the funeral arrangements if it weren't for my parents taking over most of them. Mother had added, "Karen, honey, we've arranged everything with the funeral home," in a softer tone than I had ever heard. "You just focus on yourself right now." My lifeline was the support group for those who had lost loved ones. I used to sit in a circle every Tuesday night with people who could relate to the hollow pain in my chest. During one session, I said, "Some days are harder than others," in a voice that was hardly audible above a whisper. "Sometimes I wake up and for a split second I forget he's gone." My hand was clasped by Maria, another group member who lost her spouse 2 years ago. "That's normal, sweetie. The grief comes in waves." As the months went by, I began to cope with real-world issues. James had given me plenty of money, a flat downtown, our suburban home, and a sizable bank account. The idea of spending the entire day sitting by myself in our empty house made my skin crawl, even though I could have resigned my work at the marketing agency. I changed to a part-time job instead, doing just enough to keep my mind busy. The most unexpected shift was in how I interacted with my parents. Compared to my younger sister, Sarah, I had always felt like an afterthought growing up. They never missed her school plays or dance recitals, but my academic accomplishments seldom merited a congrats. However, something changed after James passed away. I immediately agreed when they asked if I could provide them with a $1,500 monthly deposit to assist them out financially. My parents' weekly dinner gatherings had settled into a cozy pattern. Dad would pour the wine, Mom would prepare her wonderful pot roast, and we would discuss everything and nothing. I felt like I had their undivided attention for the first time in my life. For the first time, Dad would show interest in my work and remark, "Karen, tell us more about that new project you're working on." "The marketing campaign's going well," I would say, relishing these exchanges. "My boss thinks it might bring in several new clients." But the night Sarah came to supper, everything changed. When my 7-month pregnant younger sister entered the room, her presence instantly took over, as it always did. I hadn't seen her since James's funeral, and she had been renting a flat across town. Mom fretted, virtually pushing me away to give her favorite daughter space. "Sarah, sweetie, sit here," she said. "Do you need another pillow? Are your feet swollen?" Suddenly, I was invisible once more. They were instantly completely focused on Sarah and her pregnancy, as if they were seeing a switch turn. The old companion I had mistakenly assumed I had left behind, the familiar anguish of being neglected, returned to my chest. I tried to join the conversation at dinner by asking, "So, who's the father? Have you told him about the baby?" Sarah grew gloomy. As she pushed the peas about her plate, she angrily said, "That's my business. I don't need to share every detail of my personal life." Mom quickly went to her defense. "Karen, don't pry. Your sister doesn't have to explain herself to anyone." When I was undergoing fertility treatments, I couldn't help but note how different this response was. They had no trouble asking for updates and giving me unwanted advice about my personal life back then. As I saw her pile seconds onto her plate at another supper, I prodded, "But how are you planning to manage on your own? Babies are expensive." With that recognizable sneer on her lips, Sarah dismissed. Ively waved her hand. "Don't worry about my baby. We won't need anything from anyone. I've got it all figured out." I should have looked more closely at that enigmatic smile, but I had seen it too often. Sarah was constantly coming up with plans to make quick money that never worked out, including the 2-week-long organic smoothie company, the life coaching certification she never completed, and the cryptocurrency investment that cost her 3 months' rent. She patted her tummy and added, "Trust me," with a confidence that should have raised suspicions. This time, everything is going to work out exactly as planned. Dad smiled at her as if she had just revealed a cancer cure. That's my girl, always landing on her feet. I tried to ignore the usual sensation of coming in second as I took another piece of pot roast. As I watched my parents closely listen to what Sarah said, I realized that certain things never change. It was a Tuesday morning when Sarah called. Her name appeared on my phone as I was studying marketing reports at my desk. Our discussions were generally short and uncomfortable, so I almost put it on voicemail, but I had to respond for some reason. "Karen," she said with the lovely, syrupy tone she reserved for special occasions. "I'm having my baby shower next weekend at Mom and Dad's. I'd really love it if you could come." The invitation was unexpected. Even during James's burial, when we had last had a meaningful talk, she appeared preoccupied and uneasy. Unable to conceal my amazement, I questioned, "Are you sure?" The amount of times Sarah had willingly involved me in anything I could count on one hand. "Of course," she said with a rather strained laugh. "You're my only sister. It wouldn't be right without you. Plus, I have something special planned." My gut nodded at something in her voice, but I ignored it. "I'll be there," I said, already making a list of potential presents. Perhaps she was attempting to close the distance between us with this. The next Saturday, I brought 2 neatly wrapped gifts to my parents' house, a crocheted blanket and a high-end baby monitor. This was going to be my niece or nephew, regardless of our differences. A towering diaper cake centerpiece, streamers hanging from every surface, and pink and blue balloons everywhere gave the area the appearance of having been hit by a pastel explosion. Have faith in Sarah to make this an occasion. It seems like she had invited half the town. Aunt Margaret and her daughters were present. Sarah's former college companions gathered around the punch bowl, laughing over some shared memory, while Mom's bridge club acquaintances claimed the sofa. Wading through the crowd in a flowing pregnant outfit that likely cost more than my monthly rent, Sarah said, "Time for games." She looked radiant, yet I felt uneasy because of the predatory quality of her grin. She continued looking into my eyes from the other side of the room, keeping my eyes there for too long. We played all the classic baby shower games, including guessing the baby's birth date, measuring Sarah's tummy with twine, and that awful game of melted chocolate bars in nappies. Sarah looked to be more annoyed by my victory in the belly measuring competition than she should have been. She kept giving me these odd glances during it all, as if she were waiting for something. Sarah exploded with dramatic passion over every onesie and baby gadget when the presents were opened. When she arrived at my present, she held out the blanket and ran her fingertips over the elaborate design before clinking her glass to get my attention. The room became quiet, and for no apparent reason, my heart began to race. Suddenly, the air seemed heavy and difficult to breathe. She started by saying, "I want to thank everyone for coming today," while holding her big tummy with one palm. "But there's something else I need to share. I think it's time everyone knew who the father of my baby is." My heart began to race. I realized it instantly as Sarah's eyes met mine. Even though I was aware of it before she said it, the impact was nonetheless strong. "The father is James Wilson, Karen's late husband," she continued, her voice echoing through the suddenly quiet room. The world slanted to one side. I could hear the visitors' murmurs and gasps over the roaring in my ears. Aunt Margaret quickly put her palm to her lips. With anxious whispers, Sarah's college pals drew closer to one another. The lack of astonishment on my parents' expressions, however, was what really got to me. They were aware from the beginning. Sarah turned to face me and began talking again, before I could comprehend what was occurring. Her voice was brimming with joy. As James's baby is his only heir, I'm entitled to half of everything he left you, Karen. The house, the flat, the money. My child deserves their father's inheritance. The room whirled. After I steadied myself by holding onto the back of a chair, Mom and Dad moved forward to stand like bodyguards on either side of Sarah. Karen, continued Dad in his tough, businesslike manner, you must act morally here. Your nephew is deserving of his father's legacy. Although it sounded like a rasp, I was able to find my voice. You're lying. All of you are lying. James would never... Sarah's smile went sour as she took out her phone. Oh no, she said. My world fell apart again as she held up the screen and said, Then how do you explain these? In what appeared to be a hotel room, James and Sarah were there, encircled in each other's arms and sharing a kiss. They were holding hands in a restaurant I didn't recognize in another picture. Sarah said, He loved me, her voice echoing across the still room. With tears running down her cheeks, she glanced up and gasped. He was planning to leave you for me. We were going to tell everyone, but then the accident happened, and all our plans... I was unable to think or breathe. As I gathered my bag, pushed past the visitors who were murmuring, and staggered out to my car, my body moved automatically. I was already driving out of the driveway when I heard Mom yelling after me. It was a blur on the way home. I continued going over those pictures in my head, attempting to figure out what they meant. The hotel images were likely shot on his many business travels, and the restaurant photos must have been taken at those business meals he claimed to have attended. As soon as I entered my front door, my phone began to vibrate. Sarah had plenty of texts to send. Screenshots of her and James's conversations. I don't love her anymore. I haven't for a long time. We'll tell everyone after the divorce. You're the only one I want to be with. I can't wait to start our life together. One message after another, like a new knife in my heart, flashed over my screen. Conversations dating back months were displayed by the timestamp. My sister and husband were planning for the future, and I was undergoing reproductive treatments because I thought, in our marriage, I was the issue. I wondered if our entire existence together had been a lie as I paced my house that night, touching James's belongings. At 7 a.m., my parents made their first phone call. Sharp. I waited for 4 rings before responding. Dad said, Karen, you need to be reasonable about this, without even attempting to welcome her. His nonchalant attitude made my blood boil. The sooner you agree to split the inheritance, the easier this will be for everyone. Mom said, Easier for whom? For Sarah? For you? For all of us? I was on the speakerphone. You don't want this to get messy, dear, I said, scarcely raising my voice above a whisper. When did you know about them? A pause occurred, the sort of pause that conveys all the information you want before a single word is said. We've known for a while, Mom disclosed at last. James confided in us about 6 months before, well before the accident. The timeline struck me with the force of a physical punch. 6 months. Even after knowing what he and Sarah had done for 6 months, they still took my money each month and allowed me to cry on their shoulders during his burial. Traitors. On my tongue, the words seemed definitive and frigid. All of you. I blocked their numbers and hung up. I canceled the monthly transfer to their account without hesitation, even though my hand was shaking when I unlocked my banking app. Allow them to request money from their beloved Sarah. Missed calls and unanswered texts clouded the course of 2 weeks. Sarah then sent me an email threatening to sue me if I didn't willingly give up half of everything. Never before had the term voluntarily been so damning. I couldn't bear to respond, couldn't bear to consider how many others must have known and saw them together while I was unaware of James's treachery. At work, the murmurs grew intolerable, some co-workers pitying glances, others barely disguised smirks. After I broke down during a client meeting, my boss, Tom, who was also one of my few remaining close friends, invited me into his office. Gently, "Take some time off," he advised. "Paid or unpaid, whatever works for you. Your job will be here when you're ready to come back." That same day, I packed away my desk and nodded appreciatively. I became a recluse in my own house, and the following several weeks melted into one another. I ordered groceries, turned my head away from the ringing doorbell, and gazed at old pictures for hours, attempting to see the clues I must have missed. Now, the knowledge that he had been having a second life with my own sister poisoned every joyful memory, making every moment of our marriage seem like a joke. Facebook was the source of the news. A son had been born to Sarah. The picture depicted our parents looking happily at their new grandchild as she was grinning in a hospital bed. It seemed like a purposeful stab when the infant was covered in the cream-colored blanket I had made for the shower. She had given him the name James Jr., but I had already exited the app before reading the remarks. The hefty manila envelope containing the court summons arrived a week later. I opened it with shaking hands because I knew what would be inside. Sarah was claiming her son's entitlement to his father's fortune and was suing for half of what James had given me. Her demands were laid out in harsh black and white in the legalese, which was exact and chilly. She wanted a piece of the downtown flat, half the money, and the home. After 3 days of investigation, I decided on Richard Martinez, who was well regarded for managing intricate inheritance issues. He paused and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses before saying, "Miss Wilson?" rummaging through the papers on his desk with a deliberately neutral expression. "I have to be honest with you. Your sister has compelling evidence of a long-term relationship with your late husband, text messages, photos, witness statements, including your own parents. In inheritance cases like this, proof of an intimate relationship combined with a biological child, well, the courts tend to be sympathetic." My phone called that night from an unknown number while I was still absorbing this heartbreaking news. A voice, unknown yet somehow evoking a sense of familiarity, said, "Hello, is this Karen Wilson?" My heart skipped a beat because of the tone and cadence. "I'm Elizabeth Parker, James's mother." The world slanted to one side. I held onto the kitchen counter for balance, whispering, "That's impossible." James was an orphan. He told me his parents died when he was young. He grew up in foster care. She said, "Another one of his lies, I'm afraid," in a sour but civil voice. "Would you be willing to meet with me? There are things you need to know, things that might help you." The next morning, we agreed to meet in a tiny cafe downtown, neutral ground. I ordered a coffee I couldn't drink, arrived early, and almost dropped the cup as she entered. The likeness was striking. James had her smile, her eyes, and even her demeanor. She moved with the same effortless elegance that I had always found admirable in him. She continued, "I was at the funeral," after we had taken a seat at a booth in the corner, out of earshot. Back row, black dress and veil. I couldn't bring myself to approach you then. James and I hadn't spoken in years." Suddenly I recognized her, the lone individual who had sneaked away before to the conclusion of the ceremony. I had been too preoccupied with my own sorrow to wonder who she was. But suddenly the recollection came to me clearly. The graceful black woman standing away from the other mourners, her face concealed by a thick veil. I tried not to seem suspicious as I replied, "Why are you coming forward now?" I have a hard time trusting anyone or anything associated with James after all the recent disclosures. A manila envelope, ragged at the corners as though it had been carried around for a long time, was taken out of Elizabeth's purse. As she passed the envelope over the table, her fingers quivered a little. "Because I've heard about what your sister is claiming, and because despite everything, I can't let another woman suffer from my son's lies." I opened the packet Elizabeth gave me with shaking hands. There were Boston General Hospital medical records from 10 years ago, perhaps a year before James and I were married. I felt the blood leave my face as I looked over the document. The clinical jargon, one after the other, struck me with a new blow. Complete azoospermia, permanently sterile, no possibility of natural conception. "James had these tests done when he was 25, Elizabeth said carefully. "He was devastated by the results. It was one of the last things we discussed before our falling out." I was unable to talk. Hormone injections, incessant medical visits, years of fertility treatments, tears, and self-blame had all been cruel charades. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was crowded. With our parents protectively flanking her, Sarah sat in the front row, holding baby James Jr. With a modest black dress, little makeup, and a well-practiced expression of grief, she looked like a mourning, nearly widowed woman. She played to the gallery with skill as she mounted the stage, her eyes sparkling with tears as she spoke of her intense love for James. Her voice broke as she said, "All I want is what's fair for my son. He deserves his father's legacy." Mr. Martinez, my attorney, didn't say anything until she had completed her act. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that proves Miss Thompson's entire claim is fraudulent." He carried the medical records over to the bench. The judge's face remained the same as she went over the materials. Sarah's attorney immediately raised concerns over the legitimacy of the documents and the chain of possession. Sarah lost her temper. "Those documents are fake," she cried out, sobbing and holding the infant tighter. "She forged them to steal my baby's inheritance." "Your Honor," Mr. Martinez said coolly, "we request a DNA test to establish paternity given these medical records show Mr. Wilson was sterile." Sarah grinned triumphantly. "That's impossible. James was an orphan and his body was cremated. There's no one to test against. In fact," Mr. Martinez added, pointing to the gallery, "I'd like to present James Wilson's biological mother, Elizabeth Parker." A murmur swept the courtroom as Elizabeth stood. I could even see Sarah's face get pale from where I was sitting. "I am prepared to participate in a DNA test," Elizabeth declared unequivocally, "to determine if this child is my grandson." The magistrate gave a nod. "DNA testing is ordered. We'll reconvene when the results are available." Sarah shifted a little in her chair. Her face had lost all of its color. With a fierce glance at me, our mother hurried to her aid. But I felt optimism for the first time since this nightmare started. As the judge unsealed the envelope carrying the results of the DNA test, there was silence in the courtroom. Unaware of the drama going on around him, Sarah sat stiffly on her chair as the baby slept soundly in her arms. "The results conclusively show," the judge said with a stern tone, "that there is no genetic relationship between the minor child and Mrs. Elizabeth Parker. Therefore, it can be concluded that James Wilson was not the father of this child." The room emitted a collective gasp. With mascara streaming down her cheeks, Sarah's face sagged as she started crying. The judge's voice had become harsh. "Miss Thompson," she said, "would you care to explain why you perpetrated this fraud upon the court?" Sarah's voice was no more than a whisper as she held the infant closer. "I was seeing several men at the time. When James died and was cremated, I thought no one would ever know. You had money, and you needed more." One could sense the judge's disdain. "So you attempted to defraud your own sister?" she said. "Used your parents as unwitting accomplices in this scheme?" Sarah murmured, "I just wanted security for my baby." But her performance was no longer powerful. When they finally realized how deceitful she was, even our parents looked shocked. The judge's decision was prompt and clear. This court finds in favor of the defendant, Karen Wilson. All claims to Wilson's estate by Sarah Thompson are dismissed with prejudice. Miss Thompson, you're fortunate that Mrs. Wilson hasn't pressed criminal charges for attempted fraud. My parents came up to me outside the courthouse. Dad looked older than I had ever seen him, and Mom was sobbing. Mom said, "Karen, sweetheart," and she grabbed my hand. "We had no idea Sarah was lying. We can make this right. We've been struggling since you stopped the monthly transfers." I extended my hand. "Don't. Just don't." I took out my phone, immediately blocked their numbers, and left without turning around. By my car, Elizabeth was waiting. Softly, "Are you okay?" she inquired. I laughed, which shocked me. I inhaled deeply and said, "You know what? I think I actually am. Or I will be." I've been thinking about that flat downtown that James left me. I never liked it much. Too many memories. But maybe you'd like it? Her gaze expanded. "Karen, no." "I couldn't possibly," I pleaded. "Please. You gave me back my life with those medical records. Let me give you something in return." A week later, she started weeping when I gave her the keys. Whispering, "I never thought I'd have a daughter." She gave me a hug. 3 months have passed since then. My family still reaches out to me through distant cousins and mutual friends, but I've severed those connections as well. Sarah wrote a letter saying she needed help with the baby, that she's changed, and that she's sorry. I tossed it away without opening it. Elizabeth and I have weekly meals instead. We're getting to know one another by exchanging anecdotes about James, both positive and negative. She is assisting me in seeing that even if he wasn't the person I believed him to be, our joyful times together are still valid. I finally packed up James's last belongings yesterday. Elizabeth assisted me in storing some in the attic and donating others to charities. She told me stories about James when he was a little child, before the falsehoods started, while we were working. The existence of that version of him was somehow helpful. I've begun living again, but I'm not yet ready to date. I joined a hiking group, went back to work full-time, and am organizing my first trip alone. I hardly recognize the lady staring back at me in the mirror sometimes. You're always surprised by life. I got a new family that I never would have imagined having, but I lost the one I was born into. Perhaps this is the life I was always destined to have, even though it's not the one I planned. I'm Brittany, and at the age of 28, I've succeeded in creating a life that most people would consider to be rather excellent. I had secured a job at one of the city's most prominent corporations after years of arduous effort. I had finally realized one of my greatest dreams, buying my own apartment, and the pay was great. The fact that it was mine and paid for with my own funds made it ideal even if it wasn't particularly nice. I have a distinct memory of that day. Ashley, my younger sister, unexpectedly knocked on my home on a bright Saturday afternoon. She had never appeared to like living with our parents until she was 23. As she expressed it, she had always been happy to let them help her while she worked out her life. However, something was different this time. Her eyes darted about my flat with an intensity I had never seen before as soon as I opened the door for her. Despite having been here innumerable times, she strolled from room to room, touching and inspecting everything as though she was seeing it all for the first time. "Your place is so nice, Britt," she murmured, stroking the counter in my kitchen. "You're so lucky." I couldn't contain my laughter. "Are you lucky, Ashley? I put a lot of effort into this location. You are aware of that." I was shocked to see tears in her eyes as she turned to face me. She exploded. "I can't take it anymore," she said. I feel like I'm being suffocated by living with my parents. They're stifling every one of my independent goals. My coffee almost suffocated me. Coming from Ashley, who had never before expressed the least interest in independence. This was rich. "Since when?" I asked, attempting to avoid seeming skeptical. "Last time we talked, you were pretty happy having Mom do your laundry and Dad paying your phone bill." "That's exactly the problem," she said, taking out her phone and quoting. "This is textbook codependency, according to Dr. Martinez's book on relationships between parents, children, and adults. I will be caught in the parental umbilical cord forever, simply rotting away if I don't break free from it now." I put down my coffee and gave her a serious look. "Ashley, what exactly are you asking me?" She inhaled deeply, and there it was, the true reason she had come. "Brittany, I need your assistance. I need to pay the first 3 months' rent before I can move out. Like you, I'll get a job immediately away and be totally independent after that." Perhaps her use of the phrase, "just like you," struck a chord with me. Or perhaps I was simply sick of worrying about her never maturing. I heard myself respond, "Okay, I'll help you," whatever it was. She definitely squealed loud enough to be heard 3 stories below. She almost knocked me over when she wrapped her arms around me. "I'm really grateful." "Thank you. Britt, you're the greatest sister ever. I assure you that you won't regret this." Ashley stormed into my flat a week after we spoke, brandishing her phone as if she had won the jackpot. "I discovered the ideal locations, Britt. You must view them." She nearly pulled me to my sofa as she began looking through the postings while I was in the middle of preparing supper. My eyes almost burst from my skull. One of the priciest apartment buildings in the city, Riverside Towers, was where she initially showed me the apartment. She said, "Look at this view. And it has a rooftop pool, gym, and even a concierge." "Ashley," I began slowly, "the monthly rent here is $2,800. She swiped to the next item and said, "But it comes with parking." "Okay, this one's a bit cheaper, only $2,500, but look at the marble countertops." I covered her phone with my hand. "Cease. These locations are just unacceptable." I opened my laptop and showed her a listing that I had already discovered. "This is more realistic here. The rent is fair, the 1-bedroom flat is in a nice area, and it is equipped with simple amenities." Ashley studied the pictures and wrinkled her nose. "But it's so basic." "It's clean, safe, and perfectly nice for a first flat," I said with conviction. "It's actually better than where I started. Additionally, you may stroll to a number of places where you can apply for jobs." She was obviously dissatisfied as she sagged back on my couch. "I guess." "Look," I continued patiently, "this is just the type of environment you need to establish yourself. You may upgrade if you'd like when you have a reliable job and your own money." She eventually agreed to consider my offer after what seemed like an hour of persuasion. We met with a happy realtor called Linda the following day, and she gave us a tour of the flat. It was just as described, simple yet comfortable, with good furnishings and functional amenities. When Ashley thought I wasn't watching, she kept pulling faces, but I chose to ignore her. After taking out my checkbook, I said to Linda, "We'll take it." As Ashley signed the lease, I drafted checks for the 3 months' rent and the security deposit. I felt a mixture of pride and nervousness as she scrawled her signature. This was actually taking place. I kept in touch with Ashley over the course of the following several weeks to inquire about her employment hunt. Her responses got more evasive. I eventually lost patience during our most recent call. "I will not continue to pay your rent endlessly, Ashley. You must find employment." She added dismissively, "Don't worry about it," and hung up on me before I could reply. With a sick sensation in my stomach that my sister's definition of independence would differ greatly from mine, I gazed at my phone in shock. The 3 months went by more quickly than I had anticipated, My phone buzzed when I was engrossed in an assignment at work. I briefly thought Ashley was calling with good news about a job when her name appeared on the screen. I was completely mistaken. She remarked, "Hey, Britt," in a casual tone that suggested she was about to make a weather-related remark. "I wanted to remind you that the rent is due on the 15th. For the following 3 months, you will have to send money." I almost spilt my coffee. "Ashley," I replied, attempting to maintain a steady tone. "We made a deal. You were expected to get employment and begin covering your own rent. Remember that this whole thing was about getting independent?" "Oh, come on." She cut me off before I could say anything more. "Although I haven't yet discovered the ideal role, I'm definitely headed in that direction. You know, these things take time." I said, "No, I don't know," quickly. "You have 3 months to locate anything at all. You remember how much you desired independence? Well, self-sufficient individuals cover their own expenses." I could almost feel the ferocity with which she hung up over the phone. My pulse was racing as I sat back in my chair, but I was glad that I had finally held my ground. That sensation persisted for precisely 15 minutes. When my phone rang again, it was Mom. My stomach sank before I could respond. Brittany Marie Thompson. The sound of Mom's voice was like a whirlwind. "You have no right to deny your sister assistance." She phoned me in tears. "I've already covered the first 3 months' rent, Mom. The goal was for her to gain independence." "Independent?" She interrupted me. "She's your sister. Family supports family. We do that. You can afford to assist her because you have a nice work and a good pay. But do you want her to become homeless, Mom? Do you want to watch your sister walking down the street?" My willpower was waning, and the guilt trip was getting worse. Mom continued, her tone a combination of dismay and indictment that she had honed over the years. The worst thing was that I was fully aware of what was taking place. Even though I was aware that I was being controlled, I still found it difficult to resist. I eventually answered, "Fine," in a tense voice. "For 3 more months I'll pay, but that's it. This is the final instance." "That's my girl," Mom murmured, her voice softening instantly. "I knew you'd do the right thing." "Rent paid for 3 more months," I texted Ashley after hanging up and transferring the funds. "This is definitely the final instance. I mean it." A few seconds later, she responded with a single emoji, a haloed, smiling face. I immediately realized that I had made another error when the emoji's innocence seemed like a smack in the face. What could I do, though? Mom was correct about one thing. I could afford it. She was my sister. A week later, I decided to check Ashley's Instagram when I was in bed, browsing through my phone. My blood pressure went up when I glanced at it for the first time in a long time. I was paying for my flat, and there she was, posing like a lifestyle influencer. She was shown standing by the window in the ideal morning light, relaxing on the sofa, and artistically arranging herself on the kitchen counter while sipping coffee. Even worse, the captions read, "Living my best authentic life. Being true to yourself is the greatest gift. You have to make your own decisions sometimes. Have faith in the process." With every swipe, I tightened my jaw as I read through weeks' worth of posts. Nothing about looking for a job. There were many selfies and phony philosophical sayings about pursuing your aspirations, but not a single word about finding a job or how to support yourself. It was more than I could handle. I typed, "When are you actually going to start looking for work?" into our IM conversation window. The reply arrived very quickly. I pondered whether she had been anticipating my inquiry. A picture of an official-looking email on business letterhead showed up in our discussion. It contained the date, time, and place of a job interview invitation. My heart soared. At last! Perhaps she was genuinely taking it seriously. My phone rang. Ashley was the one. Before I could even greet her, she shouted, "Did you see it?" I was interviewed. However, Britt, I need your assistance with a very significant matter. Here we go, my mind said. What? Well, for the interview, I must appear professional, right? Initial impressions are crucial. To truly wow them, I need to go to the salon and get some great clothes. I was wondering if you could assist me. For example, 800 aught should cover everything. $800? I almost choked. Absolutely not. Please, Britt. This might be my big break, she said in a panicked tone. I swear that as soon as I land the job, I'll reimburse you. Don't you want me to obtain the job? The recruiting manager is always notified by the receptionist, who is the first person who sees you. On the internet, I read about it. I have to appear flawless. Please, please, please. I gave my temples a massage. Ashley. Brittany. Please, please. This is the only thing I'll ever ask for, I swear. 10 minutes of emotional manipulation, promises, and pleading. I was aware of her actions. I was aware. Nevertheless, I clenched my teeth and murmured, "Fine," as I launched my banking app. But this is absolutely the last time. She said, "You're the best sister ever. I love you so much." I transferred the funds, rather despising myself in the process. But perhaps, just possibly, this might be the catalyst that helped her get back on track. During my lunch break a few days later, I gave Ashley a call. "Hey, how did the interview go?" When she picked up, I inquired. The person on the other end paused. "What interview?" I felt sick to my stomach. "The interview. The one for which you required the $800. The one for which you displayed the invitation to me." "Oh, that." My skin crawled as she laughed a bit. "Yes, about that. To be honest, Britt, I went to look at the firm and decided it wasn't for me. The job was really dull. It involved nothing but data input and filing. A job like that would bore me to death. You know, I need something more imaginative." After months of accumulation, the anger finally erupted. "You're not in a position to be picky." I yelled into the telephone. "You haven't worked a day in your life, and I'm not going to support you forever while you wait for your dream job to fall into your lap." "Oh," she interrupted me abruptly. "I apologize, Britt, but I have to leave because I have a really urgent call. Speak later." Before I could speak another thing, the cue died. Something struck me as I sat at my desk, trembling with rage. I opened Instagram and navigated to her account. My sister was there, posted only hours ago, wearing a glittering party dress that most likely cost every penny of the money I had given her instead of any business attire for an interview. According to the caption, "Life is a party." Put on the appropriate attire. I tried to contact her back right away, but my calls ended up in voicemail. I tried messaging, but got no reply. I had worked myself into such a frenzy by the time I left work that evening that I drove directly to her flat rather than going home. Halfway down the block, I could hear the sound throbbing. The music grew louder as I moved closer to her building. It was clear to me by the time I got to her level that she was throwing a lavish party, on a Wednesday night no less. I had helped her move in, and I still had the extra key. As I inserted it into the lock, my hand trembled. The music was so loud that it overpowered any sound I might have made as the door opened softly. The opening scene reminded me of a scene from a college film. At least 20 people must have been packed into the little flat, with drinks all over the place, music playing and dancing going on. In the midst of it all, my sister was dancing carelessly, while sporting the pricey outfit I had purchased. The music abruptly stopped just as I was ready to charge across the room and face Ashley. I could clearly hear my sister's voice in the brief stillness. "You guys want to know the best part?" Ashley's speech was a little slurred. "My sister," My rich, successful sister Brittany, she pays for all of this. She almost spilled her drink as she made a big gesture around the flat. As I listened, my feet felt like they were stuck to the ground. Ashley used her fingers to make air quotes. She actually gave me $800 for interview clothes. Do you realize how foolish she is? Take a look at this dress, please. Much better than a dull office suit, isn't it? More giggling. Some of the faces in the throng were familiar to me. They were folks I had already met. And get this, Ashley went on, obviously having fun with her audience. She genuinely believes that I will land a job. For example, why would I have to work if my sister is a cash cow? She sipped her drink once more. All I have to do is cry a little about wanting to be independent, and she throws money at me. Around her, the throng burst into applause and laughing. "You're so lucky," said one female. "My sister would never." Ashley smirked and said, "That's because your sister isn't a gullible idiot. I swear, Brittany actually believes all that crap about me wanting to." At last, someone in the crowd saw me standing there. The individual's face turned white, and they took hold of their friend's arm while gesturing towards me. The realization rippled through the room like a wave. Whispers and uneasy coughs took the place of the laughing. Ashley followed their eyes, still beaming from her performance. It was almost funny how quickly the smile left her face when she spotted me. Her drink fell out of her palm and shattered on the ground as the color faded from her cheeks. In the unexpected calm, I strolled to the middle of the room, my heels clicking on the wooden floor. As I paused in the center of what had turned into a makeshift dance floor, all eyes were on me. Even though my hands were trembling, I spoke with a calm voice. I turned to face my sister and said, "So this is what you really think of me. You treat someone who has attempted to assist you in this manner. You deceive me, take advantage of me, and then laugh about it with your pals. Do you believe I'm a fool?" There was an overwhelming quiet in the room. Already, a few were hustling their belongings in an attempt to go undetected. Ashley's astonishment eventually subsided, and she adopted a composed expression that I had before observed, but had never really identified. With that old whining tone, but with a hint of victory, she questioned, "What are you going to do about it?" "In any case, you will continue to back me. Do you know why? I'll just tell Mom and Dad if you don't, and you know whose side they'll support. They always do. Until you assist your poor little sister once more, they will make your life miserable." I didn't speak again. With my head held high, I turned and left the flat. The music resumed behind me as I arrived at the lift, the bass hammering through the walls as like nothing had occurred. The ensuing weeks remained silent. Surprisingly, neither my parents nor my sister called. Instead of being serene, the quietness felt like the quiet before a storm. I was aware that the other shoe would eventually fall out. My phone pinging signaled the end of 3 months of silence. Ashley's message appeared on my screen. "Next quarter's rent is due. Money is also needed for clothing and nourishment. Send as soon as possible." It was breathtakingly audacious. She continued to treat me like her personal ATM, in spite of all that had transpired. I texted back a straightforward reply. "No. There's nothing else I'm paying for you. Never." My phone began vibrating with Ashley's incoming calls right away. I disregarded each effort as I watched it ring out repeatedly, feeling oddly at ease. Next, Mom's name appeared on my screen. When I picked up, she said, "Brittany," in a firm voice. "We must engage in a genuine discussion. After work tomorrow, stop by the home." I had a knot in my gut when I pulled into my folks' driveway the next evening. I knew I had entered an ambush as soon as I stepped through the door. Ashley appeared to be the suffering victim as she sat on the couch with her hair pulled back in a messy manner and no makeup on. Like sentries, Mom and Dad sat on either side of her. Dad began in on me before I could even lock the door. He said, "How could you do this to your sister? Because of you, she is going to be evicted. Are you aware of the suffering you're causing her?" Mom got right in. She seldom eats at all. She is under a lot of stress. Ashley gave me a big sniffle as I looked at her. The phrase, "Oh, the Oscar-worthy performance," infuriated me. "Are you kidding me?" I fired back. "For 6 months, I have been paying her rent. You know what she did with the money I provided her for food and clothing? She bought party gowns, hosted parties, and then had the audacity to boast to her friends about how foolish I was to give her money." "Oh, please," Mom said with a dismissive sweep of her hand. "She and her companions were only making jokes. You're overly sensitive." Joking? What I was hearing was so unbelievable. She literally called me a cash cow and bragged about manipulating me. "You're the older sister," Dad said in a firm tone. "You have an obligation to assist her. This is not how we brought you up." "My responsibility?" I said it again incredulously. My responsibility was to help her become independent, not bankroll her permanent vacation. A tiny, contented smile played at the corners of Ashley's mouth as she sat through it all. She believed she had me in a tight spot. Like every previous time, she assumed I would give in. Something inside of me exploded when I saw my family, my sister's arrogant attitude, my father's severe scowl, and my mother's disapproving frown. "No," I answered quietly but firmly. "I'm finished. I refuse to give her any more money. She is an adult. She can pay her own bills just like the rest of us if she wishes to live on her own." I was on my way to the door. Behind me, I could hear Mom sobbing about raising such a self-centered daughter, Dad shouting about family responsibilities, and Ashley's dramatic tears. My phone was vibrating nonstop with calls and messages as I got into my car and headed home. Without glancing at any of them, I switched it off. I felt completely free for the first time in months, free from the expectations, free from the guilt, and free from the manipulation. My cousin Jackie called to see how I was doing a few weeks after our confrontation. She wanted to update me after hearing about the fight. She informed me, "Your parents are now covering Ashley's rent." To pay for it, they had to withdraw funds from their retirement account. She hasn't even done any job searching yet. There was a period of relative calm for 2 months. Then one night, Mom's number appeared on my phone. I replied against my better judgment. "Brittany," she said in a shaky voice, "we have a problem." My mother's barely controlled cries were interspersed with fragments of the narrative. Ashley's frequent parties were causing the neighbors to complain, and the flat owner had finally had enough. At one of her most recent parties, he had unexpectedly arrived with the cops. It's hardly the worst part, though. Mom's voice broke. Ashley had sold some of the owner's furnishings and appliances when they conducted an inventory of the flat, Brittany. She has been gradually selling items to fund her gatherings. Stunned, I collapsed into my couch. "She what?" "She's being charged with theft." Now Mom was weeping aloud. However, the owner stated that he would not pursue charges provided we paid him back for everything she sold. "We need your assistance, Brittany, please. After paying her rent, your father and I are short on funds." "No," I firmly answered. "I told you all what would happen if you continued to give in to her. This is the outcome of the way you brought her up, always defending her actions and avoiding letting her deal with the fallout." "How can you be so heartless?" Mom's voice lifted. "She's family, even though she committed some errors. Consider the impact this might have on her future. Consider the impact it would have on this family." I answered, "I am thinking about her future. Maybe facing real consequences is exactly what she needs." She made one more attempt to say, "Please, Brittany." her voice brimming with tears. "If you ever loved your sister." "Goodbye, Mom." I ended the call. Jackie phoned once more a week later. She continued, "I thought you'd want to know that your parents paid off the flat owner with what was left of their retirement fund. In addition to paying a hefty penalty for breaking the lease early, they also had to pay for all of the missing items. Ashley has been expelled." "Of course. Where is she now?" "Back at your folks' place. It's still not functioning. She continues to provide content on Instagram about living her truth or other topics." Jackie hesitated. "Your parents are telling everyone you abandoned the family in their time of need." 6 months have passed since then. Ashley continues to live with our parents, is unemployed, and shares motivational sayings about overcoming adversity. Despite having to delay their retirement, Mom and Dad haven't learnt their lesson. They continue to defend her and offer justifications. Since that last phone call, I haven't had a conversation with any of them. I occasionally come across posts from members of my extended family regarding Christmas parties to which I am no longer invited. Jackie relays the stories to me, portraying me as the evil older sister who deserted her family. Here's the deal, though. Being the villain occasionally means that you are the only one with the courage to put an end to the chaos. Sometimes family is about having the guts to say no while everyone else is shouting yes. And sometimes love is about letting others deal with the fallout from their actions.